All right, our panel today is talking about scaling a SaaS company, lessons learned. Have 4 panelists who come at this topic with their own unique perspectives, and we will be getting to those people shortly. Before we do that, want to recognize the sponsors for Club E. Irish Titan is a e-commerce and web development firm. They've been a sponsor since 2014. Highland Bank is a local family-owned community bank. I've been on the board there for a number of years, as well as invested with them in some projects. They've been a sponsor since 2017. And then Lab 651 is a custom software development firm, as well as Recursive Awesome is a AI strategic consulting firm. Both of those are run by Justin Grammons. Justin also does an AI group called Applied AI. Justin, for those of you who've been coming to Club E for a little bit, you'll know that he's been on a number of my panels and also is going to be on the April panel. And we at Club E have been doing a lot of work in the AI space. And that's also, in addition to SaaS businesses, something that we feel like we know something about and do a lot of work on. So anybody who'd like to talk to us about what's going on in the AI space, we feel like we're uniquely positioned to help. Anybody who wants to learn about what's going on here at Club E, all you have to do is go to brimacombe.com. Club E also, as I mentioned, been doing this since 2007, and the Minneapolis Club's been a wonderful partner. Anybody who'd like to learn about the Minneapolis Club and what it's like to be a member, please let me know. And lastly, before we get to our panel, I've been mentioning here for a little while, I'm doing more and more business down in Mexico. And if anybody is interested in talking about business moving north or south, please seek me out for that. All right, come on up, panelists. While they're coming up, I did mention again, April 2nd is the AI panel, which we have been doing for a couple years now. We're going to be talking about hype versus real value. This is basically a version 2.0. We did that a couple months back. On May 7th, we're going to be talking about CEO succession planning. We'll be doing that with the PDA, the Private Directors Association. And then we'll be taking the summer off. So June through September, we take our summer break. All right, that leads us to our panel today. And you can turn on and get those mics all ready to rock and roll. Scaling a SaaS business, as I mentioned, we had done this a couple of months back with the Mesa Group, had a great conversation, a lot to learn, and so I thought we would bring some people back to explore this topic at an either a bigger way. And Eric Brandy, let's start by introducing you. Eric's an entrepreneur, founder, executive advisor, board member, and Mesa mentor. Eric is a mentor at Mesa, and welcome, Eric. And then Katie Mednick, new last name for Katie. Katie is founder and CEO of Luma, and then will also tell us a little bit about Spark TS, a business that she and I worked on together and successfully exited. And then Scott Clayson. Scott is a SaaS marketing executive, also worked with me on a successful portfolio company that we exited in a good way. And last but not least, Garrett Lauderdale. As it was mentioned, Garrett is at the Idea Fund in La Crosse and a supporter and sponsor of Mesa. So welcome all of you. Eric, let's jump down here. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions.
All right, thank you. So I've had the opportunity to have about 2/3 of my career in services space and about 1/3 in IT software product. Last couple decades, I had an opportunity to grow a company called Augusto here in town. We had a successful private equity transaction. During that time frame, we created a software company called SkyKit. Separated them in 2018 and then had a couple of successful rounds of capital raises with SkyKit. Around 2021, started a cybersecurity SaaS company doing governance, risk, and compliance solutions. So I've had an opportunity to kind of see both sides, the software product side and then the services side. I've done both private equity, as I've also done venture capital, angel rounds, seed rounds, and then traditional institutional rounds. Right now I'm actually working with a healthcare company doing mental health, wellness, coaching and counseling services for physicians and nurses. So I'm actually, for the first time in my life, actually in a different industry than technology, which there are some, clear parallels and some really unique aspects to the industry that's different than technology. I'm a father of two, both in college, and have 3 rescue dogs. So that's a little bit about me.
That's a lot. Eric, you mentioned so many different unique experiences and perspectives. How do you recognize the tipping point between the startup hustle and a business that's ready to scale?
Well, the first thing is I've seen a lot of founders, entrepreneurs miss the telltale signs that the business is starting to grow beyond just their own talents. Moving from I think you worded it as the startup hustle and into scale, some things start to change inside the business. And if you're not careful, it'll actually slow down the business and impact continued growth. So one of the first things is information stops flowing naturally. When you're in startup phase, generally speaking, you're small enough. Everybody has a good sense of what's happening. Your go-to-market, your ideal customer profile. You got a sense of what marketing campaigns are happening, where the product is at from a development standpoint. And for the most part, most people have a good, clear sense of the vision, mission, and priorities. As you begin to scale, you start having teams that are focused on specific functional areas. The dev team, and maybe they have a weekly meeting with the marketing team, but are they actually intimately aware what's happening? And that's where you can start to see, if you don't begin to think about scale as opposed to startup, you're going to get in trouble. The second thing is heroism becomes a liability. And hope I don't offend anybody here, but it is a lot easier to start something than it is to scale something. Because in order to start something, you have to have a group of really talented, committed people that are not afraid to work, a good idea, good timing. Timing and luck is always a huge part of it. In order to scale, you have to actually be able to build effective teams, people that are able to actually carry that momentum forward. And that requires a very different skill set. Culture becomes really deliberate. When you first get going, it's about conquering the world, conquering your market, getting those first deals, getting that fundraise successful. And there's just so much excitement. Culture is just a reflection of the people there. But you get to a certain point, and culture needs to be really intentional. And if you're not careful, culture exists, whether you're intentional or not. And the problem is that I've seen a number of founders, they get to a certain point, and before they know it, they've got some culture problems because they were never really deliberate about what it is that defined that organization, that made the kind of organization to attract and retain both clients and talent. And then the last thing is that it gets to a certain point where speed begins to become inverted. So if you're not careful, if you continue on with this startup where speed is your greatest asset when you're in startup mode. But if you're not careful and begin to processes in place, procedures in place, structures in place, you will actually start to slow down, and speed will become a major issue with you. And so those are like a couple of attributes that are really important when you start thinking about how do you move from just we're getting this thing off the ground to now I got to scale this thing.
So you mentioned something that's an interesting perspective, and given your background, you've done things both as an operator and an executive as well as an investor. How do you look at things differently when you're wearing the 2 different hats?
So I thought about that this morning, and I think the big difference is the how. As an investor, and it kind of depends if you're an investor board member, so you're more active in the business, or if you're just an investor, whether it be an angel, seed, or even an institutional investor. As an investor, the investors tend to be more about the what, the results. What's happening? Where is the business at? Are you on target or not? And what are the barriers? As an operator and an executive, you certainly have to be consumed with that. But you also have to be consumed with the how. Like we just talked about, the culture, the process, the procedures, the ability to scale. Because ultimately investors, they want to make sure that they're participating in a company that They don't want you to just grow no matter what. There's obviously good guardrails around how that should operate, but growth is what they care about. It's a return on their investment. As an executive and as an operator, you need to figure out that how portion. And that's the big difference between an operator and a investor.
Great. Well, thank you. Welcome. Katie, tell us a little bit about what's been going on in your world lately.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Just a couple things, I think. So actually, I founded a company in the railroad compliance space. So my first company, Spark TS, it started as consulting, instructional design. My background was in training and instructional design. That's where my graduate degree was from. Exited that. So I created the SaaS product called RailTasker in that space and exited from that company about a year ago, almost exactly. Since then, still somewhat involved with them, as well as founding a new software product called Illuma, which is a spiritual self-care app, and in a lot of ways a holistic learning management system. So drawing from all of that experience. And then more recently, I had the pleasure of speaking at the TEDx Duluth event. One of my fellow speakers is here. I also got married last month, so busy personally. Have 2 kids in college as well. So,
And Katie and I had a chance to work for or on Spark together for about 5 or 6 years. So she's a good friend. Welcome back. Speaking of the Spark TS, and you alluded to it a little bit, you went from a custom development business kind of chasing projects to productizing that and the know-how from developing that part of your business to creating a SaaS product, which is a wonderful way to build a business without needing a lot of outside capital. What was the hardest thing for you as an executive to make that transition from the one business model to a different business model?
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit too in the last couple of days. In hindsight, I would say one of the biggest shifts is, going from something that I had 20 years of experience, passionate about training, and something I could do really without a lot of effort, to putting myself completely in a new space. And as exciting as it is to build a SaaS product, and we had a lot of market adoption very quickly. So unlike a lot of SaaS products that kind of start slowly, I went straight with 70,000 users going live. So it was trial by fire for sure, and a different change of mind. It's also, I shifted how I looked at myself. I used to think of myself at that point as a business owner, because a lot of people have training businesses, a lot of people do consulting, but then thinking I am now an entrepreneur and I'm building something for the market. What's the impact to the market and the industry that I'm serving? So how am I solving industry level dilemmas through software? And working with Rick, a lot of founders have this issue, but getting sucked back into what's comfortable and easy because you love it and you did it for so long. So as an executive, letting go of that and letting other people lead that part of the company and focusing on the SaaS product was definitely a challenge.
And then regarding Spark, how did that shape your thinking around what your next thing was going to be? And then in particular, starting Illuma.
So it shaped everything about whether the next thing would be. Like at the point, maybe just over a year ago, when I had pre-transaction, everybody around me, maybe Rick included, was like, you're going to do this again. You're going to do some sort of SaaS product again. I was like, absolutely not. Because I was in the thick of it. And, I was in the thick of the due diligence and all of the pieces, hadn't yet made it past that. Within days of the transaction, I had the other idea for Illuma. The decisions I made, especially on how I was going to scale, what I was going to go to market with, were just very different than what I had done about 9-10 years prior. I learned less is more. I released what I called my MVP of the MVP, which my dev company didn't really like, but I had to create a new team. I wanted to see how we all work together. I just wanted to get that infrastructure down and have a really strong foundation of a product and just release one feature and see how that went. And now my MVP is, going live this week, the true one with more features and things like that. Also, a lot of decisions I made I came in under budget because I wasn't scope creeping right. I knew how to just let things focus on getting to market versus trying to build it before we have a user base. So much so that I was able to, even though my scope was an iOS app, release an Android and iOS app for only 2 more hours of dev time for Android. So those decisions, I think, were drastically different than the first time around.
All right, well, welcome again. Scott Clayson and I worked on TimeSolve together, also had a successful exit. Scott, tell us a little bit about your background, career, and then I had a couple questions for you.
Thanks, Rick. My name is Scott Clayson. I've been in the marketing space for close to 30 years now, which I can't believe I'm going to say that. Started in communications and graphic design at the National Sports Center up in Blaine. So if anybody has kids who play soccer or hockey, you've probably been up to that facility. And after working there for a number of years, I made the logical career transition into being a high school history teacher and did that for a few years. And of course, the natural progression from there is to become a stay-at-home nanny. So I did that with our son for several years, and some kids that were twins. Went back to the National Sports Center and got more involved with the digital side of marketing, even to soccer teams and hockey teams. A lot of it was digital marketing fundamentals. And then about 10 years ago, became involved with the SaaS side of the world and working with Rick and with TimeSolve. And I was employee, I think, number 8 at TimeSolve. We were starting to think about how do we scale? What do we do to scale? And by the time we exited 4 years later in 2020, I think we were a little north of 30 employees. We'd doubled our revenue and had, tripled our user base and so on and so forth. After that, I stayed with the private equity group that acquired TimeSolve and moved up to the corporate level and was the vice president of marketing for them, and went through another equity event last summer as they went through a recap, and then eventually left that group in October. And since then, I've been doing some consulting work, and I'm a consultant for a consulting company. These are legal consultants. They work with law firms on implementation of software, strategic advisory for law firms, and so on. And so that's been really interesting, staying in the legal side of things. And it's, I've been through I can represent the wars of what happens to the rank and file staff. I don't see things from the founder's point of view, but from the one layer below that, the top level executives, and how the transition of trying to scale and go through acquisitions and what happens after that with all the systems and processes, how that impacts the people below that founder level and the visionaries and such. And I live in South Minneapolis, and I have one son who's also in college here. We're all in the Big Ten, I think, to some degree here, the 3 of us. So.
All right, well, welcome. So you touched on what I think is an interesting part of your career is you were at TimeSolve. We had a smallish team focused on the one business. And then you got called up to the parent, which ultimately became 10 companies under this umbrella company. So talk a little bit about that experience and what you learned through that transition.
Yeah, it was really an interesting dynamic because the acquisitions that put together these 10 companies were all in the same space. It was all companies that provided software for law firms. So we all of a sudden were working next to people that had been our competition for a number of years. And it's like literally the next day, I'm meeting my equivalent at another company. And so that dynamic was really challenging. And there was a lot of who's going to kind of eat their way to the top kind of mentality in some ways that had to be managed. And I think we managed it well. But more importantly, we really had to work a lot in figuring out how do we adopt systems from individual companies that were anywhere from, let's say, 10 employees to 80 employees. Those all of a sudden, with this acquisition, needed to become part of a bigger operational process, different software, or same software, different implementation of that software. So really the first 2 years solid, I had to work with the same people that were at these other companies in how do we take your HubSpot and my HubSpot, your Salesforce and my Salesforce, and get them all talking to one another in a logical way that may have worked when you were looking at 1,000 customers and 5,000 users, but all of a sudden now has to also work for 10,000 firms and 60,000 users. And that was it was a really fun challenge, but it really cemented to me the idea, even at TimeSolve before that, of always keeping everybody across all departments into the mentality of, is what I'm doing today something I could do if I had 10 times more X, 10 times more leads, 10 times more sales prospects, 10 times more development that needs to be done, 10 times more knowledge-based articles that have to be built, and everything needs to be looked at through that lens and invest in processes that can meet that litmus test of. And I'm doing this today with this consulting group. They've been around for 25 years. They have 90 employees. They're very profitable, yet they still today are wrestling with that scalability. And part of it comes down to something Eric said is early on, with a lot of these smaller companies, as you look to scale, it's all about heroics. Everybody's being a hero. And it's people who are dedicated, they're passionate, and they're like, I'm gonna come in and I'm going to fix it. And you do it, you're able to fix it because there's only 10 of you and somebody has to fix it. But you have to step back and say, am I gonna be the hero when that fixing is exponentially bigger? And you got to find the systems and build your systems in a way that it always has that frame of mind and get rid of the heroics. As good as it feels to put fire out sometimes, you kick back and at the end of the day, you're like, man, we crushed that. And it felt so good. And there's a rush of the moment if there's a deadline and so on. But it gets old after a while. It really does.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Garrett, tell us a little bit about what's going on at Idea Fund and your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Nice to see everyone. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks. Happy to be here. I'm Garrett. I'm with Idea Fund. We are an early stage VC firm located down in La Crosse, Wisconsin. On the personal front, I live across the river in Minnesota in La Crescent, and I have 2 young boys, 3 and 8, and my 3-year-old is just transitioned from a crib to a bed 2 weeks ago. Another way to say that is I have not slept in my own bed in the last 2 weeks. So if anyone has any tips, I'm all ears there. Career background, I spent a few years in the insurance space and then 12 years in the higher ed space working for 2 different publicly traded higher ed companies, 3 years at Kaplan, and then 9 years at Strategic Education, Inc. During that time, I was up here in the cities. SEI is the parent company of Capella University, as well as a number of other things. So I worked out of, I don't know where I am, Capella Tower, maybe that way, for that time. And during that time, I got to do a number of different roles, which was great. And the last few years, I joined the corporate strategy and corporate venture team, which is how I kind of transitioned into the venture space. Happened to move back down to the La Crosse area at the end of 2022, which is when I joined Idea Fund on the launch of our second fund. So we're operating out of a $30 million fund. We focus on the upper Midwest, and we're making investments into early stage software companies, industry agnostic, looking for diversification in the end markets. And we typically come in pretty early. So think pre-revenue to say 500,000 ARR or so, something like that. Commonly the first institutional capital into a company, and we usually lead pre-seed and seed rounds. Sometimes we'll be the sole investor in those rounds. Other times we will co-invest. And we are in the process of building our portfolio right now of about 20 companies, and we are 3 years in, and we've invested in 15 so far. So we average about 5 new ones a year.
Great. Well, welcome. You hit on something about the stage of your fund, which is great. We need plenty of investors at that stage. And Garrett and I have talked about a number of different projects. Different points in a business's life cycle mean different things from a scale perspective. What does scale mean to you, your fund, and the companies you're working with?
Yeah, so we really live in the 0 to 1 stage of company building. Typically when we make an initial investment in a company, the company is 2, 3, 4 people, and that's it. And everything we do, it's really focused on that 0 to 1. And for us, when you think about scaling, one way that I think about it is for those founders, they are wearing all the hats, doing all the things. And you have to be equally parts focused on the tactical side and working, in the business, doing all the things you need to do every day, as well as equal parts into the strategic side to start to lay the foundation and build the systems and processes, kind of as Eric was mentioning earlier, to prepare for the future growth. So it's being able to manage both working in the business and on the business simultaneously.
All right. Well, thank you and welcome. terms of the kids, good luck with that. All right, for the panel, name one what would be called a crack in the system as the team started to grow a little faster than what you expected or what you were in the middle of. So what was one thing that you saw that said, oh boy, we're moving a little quickly here?
Bad hires.
Bad hires, good one.
I have a really very specific one in the sales process. For our particular stage we were at, we had 2 salespeople. And when people would start a free trial with our software, we would assign it to one of the 2, present them with an automated email to book a meeting, to do your training, so on and so forth. And as we started getting more and more of those free trials, all of a sudden we saw that calendar for that assigned person, you couldn't have a meeting for like 2-3 weeks because our calendar was so full now. Great news, right? We have a full calendar, but it revealed the crack of like, oh, we hadn't thought of that. Like, what, maybe we're assigning these people at the wrong time, and we switched it to a round robin system. When they started the free trial, it presented a round robin calendar, and whoever was available first got that lead. But it's that type of like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, until you actually have to think about that and realize that's a bad experience for the user to have to wait 2 weeks to talk to somebody about the software.
I'm going to double down on Eric's on bad hires. Especially in the 0 to 1 phase, if your company's 2, 3, or 4 people, every additional person that you're hiring is so crucial, and they play such a big part. If that hire is not the right fit, it's just so much time and energy and commitment, one, to fix it and make it right, and then start over and find that right person.
Yeah, definitely. I would say for me, I kind of went from 0 to 100 when we went live with my first compliance SaaS product. And it was the dev costs. I had an external dev team, and they just exponentially grew. So switching from that into in-house dev team and doing those early dev hires was definitely a critical pivot point.
I agree, having lived through that. All right. What's one decision that you thought was the right decision, sounded good, looked good on paper, but then when you tried to implement it, didn't work quite so well?
Tell you one I can remember vividly. Again, it came from a hiring process. Our founder had the philosophy, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, of hiring salespeople that had worked at law firms doing the time and billing, with the idea like, hey, when you talk with lawyers, you need to establish that credibility. And if you can say, hey, I've worked at a firm, I know what it's like, and so on. Great idea. Finding people who know that skill set and can sell, that Venn diagram doesn't have a lot of interaction. And so he would continue to hire people to be salespeople who came from that background. They couldn't sell. It seemed like a good idea on paper. And we were lucky that we did happen to find like a unicorn person who could do both. And she ended up being a really strong sales leader. But that was one that, I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea, Raza. Let's do that. And it ended up being not the right play.
Kind of piggybacking off that, outsourcing sales. So there's time and place for looking at outsourcing and having strategic partners that are handling really core functional parts of the business. But there were 2 times where I outsourced something that was a mistake. One was I outsourced sales, in particular business development, and it sounds great on paper, like you just said. I pay per appointment. This is awesome. In a B2B enterprise kind of oriented software sales, that's just a pay for performance. I'll do that all day long. Problem is they don't learn, they don't know, they don't really actually understand what it is that we're doing. And so the quality just was not there. And then I also did it with HR, specifically recruiting. There's a friend over here who's a couple guys I know in that space, and that they can be very strategic, but outsourcing the kind of the brand spokesperson so that you can find that top talent and recruit that talent that knows and represents like who you are as an organization, such that the next number of hires, when you begin to scale, actually fit in a culture accretive, not distractive or reductive. That I found was a tough thing to outsource. And again, looked great on paper, but needed to bring that in-house.
I wish I just had one to choose from, but I'm going to just pick one based on what's being said. So, from a product perspective or even internal processes, one mistake is just managing the tension between when do you automate and when do you keep doing things manually, especially when you have fast growth. So from a product side, we had a new product offering where we're going to do these API connections between clinics, and we had drug and alcohol tests. So a bunch of clinics and labs through our product. And we kicked off the API before the product really was mature enough to really understand where the heck we were connecting what to the ad. So it took 2 years. Had we just focused those resources on defining the product and then automating and maybe manually doing that data exchange and then automating it, we would have save ourselves 18 months of dev time. So there's plenty of examples of that, I think.
In a VC firm, there's a lot of learnings that you take from a fund one moving into fund two. And one for us in the first fund, typically when we make an initial investment, we're working with a company to set up the board of directors. In the first fund, we designated a lot of our board seats and brought in experienced entrepreneurs to represent us on the board. And there's a lot of benefits to that, but one of our learnings was we were just too far away from the actual information and from the action. And so not surprising, there's bumps in the road in early stage companies, and we're too far removed. And so when something went wrong, it was a big time reactive mode. So for Fund 2, for all of our board seats, we are actively taking those, and that's been very helpful for us to be more proactive and try to get ahead of some of the bumps that happen.
All right. How about one thing where the founder is doing what founders do, running the company best that they can, and maybe they underinvest in something or pay less attention than they should to something? What would one of those things, and what would an example be?
Well, marketing budget, of course.
Of course, yeah. Actually, you did in the business we're talking about, there wasn't much marketing budget, and so absolutely, marketing budget all the way.
You know, one that we see a lot of times is just from a team building perspective. We'll do exercise with founders where, you know, you kind of run through the business model and you look out 3 years and say, okay, what does org structure need to look like to really support this business model and this forecast in 3 years? And it's when you do that, it can be surprising to say, like, if we really think we can scale at this level, there's going to be a lot more hiring that needs to happen, and you have to be able to get in front of that. So if you need to deliver X in 2028, that hiring needs to happen in 2027. So that's an underinvestment that we've seen, is just building the team ahead of the scale.
I would really agree with that from the perspective of having to be able to, it's better to look around the corner and make hiring somebody maybe a little too soon than a little too late. And because what happens if you do it a little bit too late is the existing staff, if you know you're at 2 salespeople and you know you need to get to 3, if you're not hiring that third person or starting a little bit early, those 2 that you have all of a sudden are completely overwhelmed. And you know, morale's going to go down, they're going to get stressed out, burned out, and that's not great for that culture that Eric talked about earlier. So I would agree. The hiring, it's like the old saying with football teams and coaches, you cut a guy a year before you really should. In this case, you hire maybe, I wouldn't say a year, but you hire a little bit earlier than you maybe think you should.
I agree with that, but I was thinking through, like, I think it's hard when you're making those financial decisions in a startup, but I think that is 100% true. For me, I think I can see it now that I invested in the teams. When I exited, I had about 30 employees. So it was, you know, I had gone through some of those pain points you were talking about, building teams, being intentional about culture, and how do you do that? But where I missed was really building a leadership team, not a management team. So what I left behind, you know, when my vision and strategy went away as a CEO, you know, I had a bunch of managers lacking that strategic vision. And I think that was something I missed.
Something else I've seen happen, which is, you know, as an entrepreneur, especially a founder, you're getting something off the ground, you kind of have to ignore risk. You have to get excited and be enthusiastic. I mean, you wouldn't do it otherwise. The amount of risk involved, you wouldn't start something. And then as you get rolling, there's just customers that just get it. Those early adopters, they understand the problem that you're trying to solve. They understand the product, and they're just excited and they get it. And I've seen entrepreneurs and CEOs in that stage just assume the rest of the market will operate and exist the same way. And the reality is they don't spend a lot of time looking and really analyzing and debating that ideal customer profile, not those early adopters that just get it, but the broader part of the market that actually may not just sign up as soon as you have your MVP launched because they're like, oh, that's a perfect app. I was looking for this forever. And that's where you can get, companies that will hit a plateau and really struggle, or companies that will continue to grow right through that. And it's that understanding that broader market opportunity.
I think it's putting together the infrastructure to keep a customer as much as acquiring a customer.
Great point.
That's where I think some of the cracks I can think of like, a knowledge base for this, all of the little things that like delights the customer once they are a customer and keeps them as a non-churn. That's an investment too of money and time and resources. And oftentimes when you're looking like, hey, we want to scale, we want to grow. It's like, yeah, but you can't forget what you're leaving behind with the people that are already your existing customers.
I'd just say from experience that I think the way I pushed through that was what I was calling for a while the paradox of success. I was all in on this one vision, but I was willing to pivot when I needed to. So I would get that early adoption excitement. And then you're right, you kind of plateau and you're like, okay, you can also work really hard on finding and convincing people of what you're doing, or you can kind of reframe and reinvent the product itself. And I think founders are sometimes not as flexible in that.
Because the skills to get something started, launched, and birthed, you kind of have to have blinders on. And those are the blinders that can get in the way as the business crosses a certain threshold. And now you've got to take those blinders off and look at reality a little bit more. And that's not always a given.
I did not think I'd be doing drug and alcohol testing, but it pushed me through that, right? So we talked a lot about PRIC in the company that I wasn't expecting about. So.
And it's a male-dominated industry, so, All right, next question. Lightning round, short answer, because we're only have a couple of minutes left. What is your golden rule for a SaaS business?
Don't be afraid to fire if you even have an inkling. All too often I've seen, and I don't mean this to take this lightly, you're impacting people's lives, but I mean, I've been guilty of like, I know, but I just wait. Maybe they can turn it around. Maybe, and 6 months later, it's like, I should have pulled this trigger 6 months ago.
If you don't have users, it's not working.
You can't manage what you can't measure, but make sure you're measuring the right thing.
I would say have strong convictions loosely held.
So that's the next question. I'm going to start with Scott, because you mentioned about the metric. What is your favorite SaaS metric to track?
Depending on the product exactly, it would be people who are actually starting to use the product. So free trials. Most SaaS products offer like a free trial of some sort. The equivalent of that, if you don't, would be demos booked. But it's like how many people are actually raising their hand and say, I want to use the product in a test environment of some way. That was the North Star that really led to a lot of our growth success.
Right now, I'm most concerned about anonymous users, converting to registered users, and what is that rate?
Everything they said. But in a B2B and enterprise SaaS, there's actually something that a gentleman back there brought into my organization 10, 15 years ago called the double haircut. And it's a pipeline management. And once you get it kind of dialed in, I started feeding it into finance to help me project forward how much, with a fair degree of accuracy, what's going to close and when, such that I can continue to pour capital back into the business. So you said hire early. In order to hire early, you have to have command, not just on your cash, but your pipeline. And so this double haircut process that Tom back there kind of coached me on 15 years ago has been one of my go-tos in every business I've been at.
I mean, net revenue retention is the core metric we hone in on for sure.
What's a retention rate in your mind that's good? Because I was going to add that.
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of variability there. It depends on, what stage you're at in the company as well. I mean, if you can get in the early days, if you can get above 100% net revenue retention, that's a pretty good signal that something's happening.
And for folks that maybe haven't focused on that, having talked to a bunch of private equity firms looking to buy SaaS businesses, you can only have a net loss of attrition of a couple of percentage points. You start talking 5-7%, and they're like out the door as fast as they can go. So focus on attrition. That was going to be my addition there. Okay, last question. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
You don't really know everything. I know a lot less than I did as I get older, it seems.
I know Mesa is sponsoring this, and I'm a Mesa mentor. Get good mentors. I've a mentor now, and I get a chance to play forward with a med tech SaaS company, and it's a fantastic and rewarding experience. But there's also two gentlemen in the room that were mentors in my career earlier on. And so Larry Gates right there and Tom Venable. And I would have gone to my younger self and said, start that earlier.
For me, it's all the sort of the same theme, but I would have looked at a fractional CTO and invested in that just to help with the oversight, because I was a non-tech CEO of a tech company. And so that would have saved me some heartache, pretty sure.
I would say, from a career journey and path perspective, it's, try to take as much as you can from every role that you have. It's hard to see it looking ahead, but when you reflect and look back, you can kind of see how the dots connect.
All right, let's give a welcome and thank you. All right, I hope to see you April 2nd for AI in Business. Is it hype or real value? And again, get a sticker for your parking ticket if you haven't done that yet. Thank you for coming.